Focus on Headline. All right, let's take a look at what major issues are making the headlines today on Focus on Headline. For this, joining us in the studio, we have our reporters Kwon So-ah and Yoon. Guys, welcome back.
Hello.
I'm going to start things off with the top story today. U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris making her visit to South Korea. She, of course, met with President Yoon, where the two shared views on North Korea, economic security, other issues of mutual concern, this including something that we've talked about, South Korea's concerns over the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act. So start us off with this visit by U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris.
All right, so President Yoon and Vice President Kamala Harris from the U.S. met at the presidential office this morning. It's the first time in 4 years and 6 months that an acting vice president has visited South Korea. The last time it was Mike Pence at the 2018 Pyeongchang Winter Olympics. And as we know, Harris was also just recently in Japan after her 2-day visit there. She came to South Korea. And with President Yoon, she had a roughly 85-minute talk. So there they spoke about reinforcing South Korea-U.S. bilateral ties, the situation on the Korean Peninsula, and other regional and international issues of mutual interest. Now, the biggest attention, though, was for Koreans on the Inflation Reduction Act, which President Yoon reportedly did address during the behind-closed-door part of the meeting. He conveyed South Korea's concerns on the law's potential damage to Korean carmakers as based on the IRA. Tax credits are only to be given to electric vehicles manufactured in North America. And according to a spokesperson at the presidential office, President Yoon delivered Seoul's concerns about the IRA, saying he hopes the two countries will closely cooperate to, quote, produce a mutually satisfying agreement in the spirit of the South Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. And also, Vice President Harris was said to have said that she is well aware of Seoul's concerns about this act and also President Biden, and that she's going to look carefully into ways to find a solution to South Korea's concerns in the process of the implementation of the law. And the two also spoke about North Korea's recent missile threats as well as nuclear threats. Yoon and Harris reaffirmed their goal of complete denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula and condemned the provocative nuclear rhetoric and ballistic missile launches that violate UN Security Council resolutions. And also, there's a lot happening on this day because it's just a quite short trip. What is seen as an intention to demonstrate Washington's security commitment to South Korea is Harris's visit to the Demilitarized Zone, or DMZ, which separated the two Koreas. So it looks like she there also made some comments, a message to North Korea, I should say, as media have been citing Reuters that she said that North Korea's nuclear program is illegal, and also that there's violation of human rights in North Korea. And she also denounced the dictatorship in North Korea. And with that, she has said that the world is being threatened by North Korea's provocations. Yes, so that's most of the gist that happened today.
Yeah, and obviously, I mean, a lot of, talks in regards to North Korea, it's kind of the same statements coming from the U.S. officials, but I think the biggest one, once again, is the Inflation Reduction Act, because as we've seen, this including South Korean President Yoon taking all opportunity possible to address the issue. And I think we did get at least, the best response so far, right? She understands the concerns of South Korea. President Biden also understands the concerns of South Korea. And if our experts are correct in that probably Washington will look into maybe giving a grace period for South Korea, or even remove South Korea, or give an exemption for South Korea after November's midterm elections, that would be certainly good news for us. But so during this very short stay for Vice President Kamala Harris, she also had a special meeting with Korean women leaders. Can you tell us what that meeting was all about?
Yeah, I think that one was quite interesting. This meeting was titled Groundbreaking Women Roundtable. And some of the participants, I bet you all are aware of, for instance, Kim Yeol, figure skating superstar.
Oh, that woman
Kim
leader.
Yeol.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then there was also Yoon Yeol, actor Yoon Yeol, of course, and also Choi Soo-yeon, Naver's CEO, and also I think there was also an anchor of a Korean broadcasting station. So I guess women from all walks of life in Korea were involved in this meeting. And you might wonder why during such a short stay Kamala Harris, Vice President, would lead such a meeting. But the current Biden administration actually places a lot of importance on gender equality.
Yeah.
And this is why she also met with these women here in Korea, especially because within Korea and also from the outside world, there is still some inequality regarding gender equality. There are still some discrepancies, differences here in the nation. So they had this discussion there. And the White House, in a press release, did say that the vice president underscored the priority that the Biden-Harris administration places on gender equality and women's empowerment in the Republic of Korea and around the world.
She should have also met with my wife because she leads my household. So there you have it. Polina Maldonado says, I love her. Are you referring to Kim Yeol or are you referring to Kamala Harris? Nevertheless, we're going to give you guys an update of something that we briefly talked about on the show yesterday, because at the time it was just breaking news. So we didn't have a whole lot of news in regards to this. Of course, this is in regards to North Korea firing 2 short-range ballistic missiles into the East Sea. This comes 3 days after the short-range ballistic missile into the East Sea. This was Sunday morning, I believe, and we knew this was going to come. We had the Seoul-Washington Joint Maritime Exercises. We had U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris come into Seoul as well. So all of these provocations, widely expected, but nevertheless, saying, let's get the details of this.
All right. North Korea again fired a pair of short-range ballistic missiles on Wednesday, and according to the Joint Chiefs of Staff, the missiles were fired Wednesday evening between 6:10 p.m. and 6:20 p.m. from North Sunan region in Pyongyang toward the East Sea. And the missiles flew about 360 kilometers at an altitude of about 30 kilometers with the speed of Mach 6, which means 6 times the speed of sound. And further details are still being analyzed by both South Korea and U.S. authorities. But based on what we know so far, the latest missiles were believed to have been fired from a transporter erector launcher, or TEL, targeting an uninhabited island off the coast of Gilju County, North Hamgyong Province. And as we know, North Korea uses the missile launch as a means of delivering a message by using force instead of words. And this time, like you briefly mentioned, SJ, experts say there are 2 reasons for the latest provocation. First, just like the one happened on September 25th, analysts say apparently it is a backlash against the U.S.-South Korea joint naval exercise, which include a U.S. nuclear-powered aircraft carrier. And this makes it the biggest combined naval exercise conducted by the 2 countries since 2017. And more specifically, some 20 South Korean and U.S. ships, including the U.S. Navy's Nimitz-class nuclear-powered aircraft carrier Ronald Reagan, which is about 100,000 tons, and South Korea's key warships, such as the 7,600-ton Aegis destroyer Seoe Ryusong-ryung and the 4,400-ton Munmu the Great destroyer, participated in the recent joint drill, which ran from September 26th to the 29th. And the size of weapons show why it's called the biggest joint naval exercise in 5 years. And besides that, U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris' visit to Seoul is also one of the reasons. And Harris, who arrived in South Korea Thursday morning, visited the heavily fortified demilitarized zone separating the two Koreas, like Soasad, this evening. And the U.S. Vice President's plan on visiting DMZ was confirmed when Prime Minister Han Duck-soo and Kamala Harris met on the sidelines in Japan when they attended the state funeral for former Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. And as stressed by Kamala Harris herself, her visit to DMZ signals the ironclad alliance between Seoul and Washington and shows U.S. defense commitment to South Korea, which may increase fear and anxiety of North Korea in terms of its national security.
All right, so this time we're going to go back to the missile test once again. Response to North Korea's most latest ballistic missile launches that happened yesterday. Again, the two short-range ballistic missiles, which were sent over to the EC. We had some response from the top nuclear envoys from Seoul, Washington, and Tokyo. Seoul, what did they say?
Right. So South Korea's special representative for Korean Peninsula Peace and Security Affairs, or top nuclear envoy Kim Gun, held separate talks with his U.S. and Japanese counterparts following the North's SRBM launches. Now, Seoul's foreign ministry said Kim, who is currently in France, talked with the U.S. special representative for North Korea, Sung Kim, over the phone on Wednesday local time, where they emphasized the threat North Korea poses with its launches to the Korean Peninsula as well as the international society. The two strongly denounced Pyongyang's actions that came just 3 days after their previous firings, and that despite the international community's earlier warnings, adding their launches are a clear violation of UN Security Council sanctions. The two sides vow to continue to strengthen their bilateral cooperation against threats from the North while maintaining a tight joint defense posture. Seoul's top nuclear envoy also spoke with Japan's Director General for Asian and Oceanian Affairs Bureau, Funakoshi Takehiro, on the same matter. And the remarks were similar, including an agreement to increase cooperation on the bilateral and trilateral front with the U.S. The U.S. Defense Department, in a statement, said Sung Kim called on North Korea to engage in, quote, serious and sustained diplomacy, underscoring that the United States remains open to dialogue. And a spokesperson told Korea's Yonhap News Agency on condition of anonymity that the U.S. condemns the North's ballistic missile launches and that they pose a threat to neighbors and the international community. North Korea, meanwhile, remains silent on its missile launches. Usually what they do is they report on their acts a day after through their state media by assessing their launches, usually saying that it was successful, and also by posting photos. But this pattern, interestingly, has not been seen since May. So regardless of missile type and regardless of how successful or not a launch was, they have not reported on them recently.
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of reasons for why they're silent on the matter. Like you said, so I mean, sometimes they come out with this like music video-esque video with Kim Jong-un coming down with his aviator glasses, and recently they've been quite silent. And one of the reasons they say either it's because they don't want to irk China. China doesn't want a whole lot of like attention in this area. Obviously, every time there's like a provocation, the U.S. gets involved. Japan gets involved and stuff like that. And so like China gets really upset when North Korea test fires these ballistic missiles. But also if there's like no new technology that they want to share, they just won't report it on or anymore. And I forgot who it was. One of the experts also said that it's because they're just basically playing by their own rule now. It's just a regular exercise. Nothing needs to be mentioned and so forth. In the meantime, according to media reports on Tuesday, a Chinese Navy intelligence gathering ship was spotted in the EC ahead of the joint South Korea-U.S. drill. Of course, not just North Korea upset about these joint military naval drills here. China's going to be very upset with this. Sam, let's talk a little bit more about this.
Japanese public broadcaster NHK reported on Tuesday that Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Forces on Friday, September 23rd, detected a Chinese intelligence gathering ship sailing into the East Sea, where the joint South Korea-U.S. naval exercise took place. And the report said the Chinese Navy vessel then passed through the Strait of Tsushima and entered the East Sea. And this report tells us that both China and Japan's Maritime Self-Defense Forces appear to be conducting surveillance activities around the East Sea. In the meantime, the U.S. Army Pacific has operated its third Multiple Domain Task Force, or MDTF, in Hawaii, which seems as a part of effort to counter China's influence in the region. And this is the second special unit among three to be established in the region with the aim of focusing on the security situation in Indo-Pacific, which is considered as a priority theater by Washington.
Seong, also, following the four-day joint naval exercise, South Korea and the U.S. will launch an anti-submarine warfare exercise in waters off Korea's east coast. This, of course, due to some reports of North Korea developing its SLBMs, some nuclear submarines as well. But this time, it's going to involve Japan.
Right. South Korea, U.S., Japan are set to hold trilateral anti-submarine warfare exercise in the East Sea on Friday for the first time in 5 years. And the trilateral military exercise was designed to strengthen its ability to respond to growing threats from North Korean submarines, including upgrading SLBM's capabilities at a time when North Korea's nuclear and missile threats, including a series of ballistic missile launches, continue. And this year, the nuclear-powered aircraft carrier USS Ronald Reagan and its strike group, which also participate in Seoul-Washington Combined Maritime Drill, are also expected to take part. But some criticize this upcoming event, saying that the joint military exercise involving Japan is inappropriate. Although the Ministry of National Defense has been pledged that it would consider public sentiment on strengthening security cooperation with Japan, civic groups argue that the current decision do not reflect public opinion at all. In addition, as Japan continues to claim sovereignty over Dokdo, an island of Korea in the East Sea, public argue that having a joint trilateral drills in the East Sea is unacceptable. And yet the previous government had refused the proposals from the U.S. and Japan first because such combined exercise can be interpreted as a collective action that counters not only North Korea but also China, which eventually will bring major change to the geopolitical terrain in Northeast Asia. And second, the public remained strongly opposed to any Japan self-defense forces presence in Korean Peninsula due to its tragic history of being occupied by Japan for 36 years.
Yeah, and this is another one of the reasons for why many have been very much against South Korea taking part in the fleet review that Japan is set to host. And one of the major reasons is because the flag that they hoist during the naval review, the fleet review, is the Rising Sun flag. And we've talked about this on the show on many occasions. So, not surprising that there's some backlash on that front. Guys, another thing that we've been watching very carefully is obviously the economy right now. Seoul stocks ended almost flat this Thursday, which is, in some ways good considering, it's just been kind of falling and falling and falling. And so if going flat is pretty good. The government also tried to stabilize the market. Let's talk about their latest measures here.
Right. So after yesterday, Korea's stocks fell to an over 2-year low on recession concerns. This Thursday, stocks ended almost flat, but they did start off on a higher note. Now, the benchmark KOSPI rose 1.64 points or 0.08%, closed at 2,170.93, and it hit an intraday high of 2,210.61. The local currency, meanwhile, ended at 1,438.91 against the US dollar, up 1 won from the previous session's close. Yes, regarding the response measures, the South Korean government plans to purchase back 2 trillion won, or roughly 1.4 billion US dollars, to buy back government bonds to stabilize the market and this starting this Friday. And this decision was made during a Ministry of Economy and Finance meeting yesterday. The central bank also announced that it will come up with an emergency buyback worth 3 trillion won or over $2 billion starting Thursday.
Yeah,
Let's hope this will help.
Yeah, I just kind of been watching the stocks recently. A lot of people all of a sudden that stopped looking at the stock market is looking at it again because they're saying, "Oh, let's go in on the dip." But the fact is, just when you hit, you think that it hit rock bottom. There's more. It continues to go down right now. In fact, I believe BlackRock recently said, not just in the Korean stock market, but like the global stock market, they said, don't go in right now, don't sell, don't buy, don't do anything right now. The economy certainly doesn't look good. And not to mention with the U.S. Fed probably going to be increasing their interest rates even further, the stock market is going to be affected even more moving forward. In the meantime, business sentiment among South Korean companies turned downward again in the month of September after turning it around in August. Seong, let's get the latest on this.
Yes, the Business Sentiment Index, or BSI, for all business sectors in South Korea in September fell from the previous month, recording its worst figures in 1.5 years. According to data released by the Bank of Korea on Thursday, the BSI for all industry stood at 78, down 3 points from the previous month, which recorded 81. And the BSI is often used as an indicator that shows upturn or downturn in the economic conditions. And a reading below 100 means the overall mood is pessimistic and vice versa. By sector, Business Sentiment Index for the manufacturing industry fell 6 points from the previous month to 74, and it's a pretty big drop. And more specifically, electronic and telecommunications equipment fell 13 points due to dropping semiconductor prices and due to decrease in demand, while primary metal manufacturing fell 11 points with the rising exchange rates and sharply increasing raw material commodities prices. Amid a strengthening U.S. dollar. And here, I mean raw materials that South Korea needs to import from other countries. And an official from the Bank of Korea attributed the worst figures reported in September to concerns about an economic slowdown caused by interest rate hikes, of course, in major countries, overlapping with skyrocketing inflation.
Yeah, but I think really the strengthening U.S. dollar is the major thing there for a lot of companies that are importing a lot of these raw materials from overseas, and it's just costing more and things like that. But
it will continue, unfortunately. Right?
That's the thing. It's going to continue for a while, and then this whole currency exchange rate that we continue to talk about on a daily basis here. I mean, who knows how much further the Korean won is going to depreciate? And I mentioned this before. Amongst the Asian countries, Asian currencies, they were saying that the Korean won and the Philippine peso is going to be impacted the most. But I think I read somewhere like that the Chinese yuan also dropped to its like 14-year low.
Yes.
Not just yesterday or something like that. They're expecting that to go further down, but what's going to happen? Who knows? Let's talk about Russia now. UN Security Council saying that it's going to be convening a meeting on Friday at Russia's request to discuss the leaks. We're talking about the Nord Stream 1 and 2 pipelines. We talked about it very briefly yesterday. There's some conflicting claims. I mean, we have some of the Western countries saying that Russia is sabotaging the pipelines, whereas Russia is saying, "What are you talking about? We have nothing to do with this." So we are being falsely accused. Seong, tell us more in details.
Russia's Foreign Ministry spokeswoman Maria Zakharova took to social media to say that Russia plans to call a UN Security Council meeting in regards to the leaks in the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 gas pipes. In an earlier statement, Zakharova argued President Joe Biden, previously on February 7th, 2022, warned that there would be no more Nord Stream 2 if Russia invaded Ukraine, and Biden is obliged to answer questions about whether the U.S. was behind the gas leaks. And amid the claims and counter-claims, the UN Security Council accepted the Russia's request and said it will hold a meeting on Friday to discuss the issue. And previously, at a summit with German Chancellor Olaf Scholz, Biden said that Russia would have to pay the prices for war, such as economic sanctions, referring to the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline. And Russia is strongly opposed to the claims from the Western countries that the gas pipeline leak was caused by Russia's terrorism, and continues to point to the U.S., saying that the U.S. energy company will gain reflective profits if the Russian gas pipelines are shut down.
I mean, I found it interesting that Joe Biden warned that there would be no Nord Stream 2 if Russia invaded Ukraine. I mean, that's kind of a big thing with just Germany and Russia and things like that, which is why former German Chancellor Angela Merkel, at the time when things were kind of starting to get very tense and before the Russian invasion of Ukraine, that was kind of the topic of discussion that, she refused to kind of discuss because she knew that she needed the Nord Stream 2 and it cost like billions and billions of dollars to develop, and you can't just shut it down. But now it's becoming a problem once again. The U.S., meanwhile, continues to denounce referendums held by Russia in the occupied areas of Ukraine, also expressed its will to come up with new sanctions against Russia and new support measures for Ukraine. So let's get more details on that.
Right, so all of that was addressed at a White House briefing on Wednesday local time. Press Secretary Karine Jean-Pierre referred to what she called the sham referenda held by Russia in occupied regions in Ukraine that forced Ukrainian civilians to cast their ballots in favor of becoming part of Russia. Jean-Pierre said these referenda came straight from the Kremlin playbook, and she said that they were manufactured and manipulated. She also used a term like that it's outrageous. She cited videos and reports that show how Ukrainians are made to vote under the watch of armed soldiers. More precisely, she referred to armed guards going door to door, intimidating Russian residents and then forcing them to vote. I think even for us, if someone stands beside you with a gun, I would, vote for them. So that's how it currently is going. And according to the White House, Russia's referendum process was all pre-staged weeks or even months ago, with an obvious result in favor of what the Russian authorities want. The press secretary said the world clearly sees Ukrainians do not want to become part of Russia, but the exact opposite, as they continue to fight for their independence and are defending their territory despite the costs they have to bear. With that, the U.S. plans to cooperate with its allies and partners to impose additional economic sanctions against Russia, individuals and entities within and outside the country that are helping Moscow's illegitimate actions and also garner global opposition, including at the UN. Washington also announced a $1.1 billion US package of weapons and equipment for Ukraine. This will be provided through the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative and involves 18 new high mobility artillery rocket system, or HIMARS, that have been effectively used on the battlefield in Ukraine, as well as hundreds of armored vehicles, radars, and counter-drone systems. Now, the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative is a funding program that's led by the U.S. Department of Defense. And since late February, so since Russia has invaded Ukraine, the U.S. has supported Ukraine with more than $16.2 billion. That includes the recently announced additional $1.1 billion.
It's a whole lot of money, to be honest with you. But I mean, that's going back to like the referendum, right? And I mean, we ourselves here, we don't have proof of whether or not there's been tainting when it comes to election fraud or anything like that. But like so I said, if there are militias or the soldiers standing there with their gun pointed at me and going, "Go ahead, vote," I can't say I'm going to be voting against a referendum. I might be voting in favor of whatever Russia wants, right? Which is why I'm not. But at the same time, it is true, though, like in some other regions, like in the Donetsk region and the Luhansk region, like many of them do consider themselves like more Russian than Ukrainians. And so I do understand that you'll get like a good amount of votes. But like, what was like the result was like 99% in favor, 98% in favor, and things like that. And these numbers can even be made up. And this goes back to, like, for example, if you look at a couple of years back, the very controversial presidential election over in Belarus, where everyone basically, voted against Lukashenko, and then, everyone had their own apps or something. They were saying like, oh, we voted for who, we voted for, and it looked like that Lukashenko was going to eventually lose that election, and it turned out Lukashenko ended up like winning by an astonishing number of votes in favor for him, and they were saying they're voter fraud. I mean, there are some countries out there. I mean, these secret. I thought ballots are supposed to be secret.
I think the point is if the referendum was held in a peaceful way or not.
When you have soldiers there with guns and going to your,
and that's the problem.
Going to your house to house and giving them the ballots and go ahead vote.
Yeah. How can we trust the result?
What do you mean? That's just nowhere near. That's not anything peaceful. In the meantime, South Korea has also announced that it will cancel plans of launching satellites using Russian rockets amid the international community's sanctions on Russia's space program. So, tell us more about this.
According to a document released on Wednesday, South Korea will not go ahead with the plans of launching the Korean multi-purpose satellite 6, dubbed Arirang 6, using Russia's rockets in northwestern Russia later this year, in line with the Western sanctions against Russia. And with the indefinite delay of Korea's satellite launches, experts say with 47.2 billion won tied up in costs related to the launch of satellites, there is also a possibility that South Korea will not be able to receive a significant amount of down payment back if the contract gets cancelled.
Yeah, I mean, this is like one aspect of how South Korea has been impacted by the sanctions on Russia, but there's also a lot of like South Korean companies that do businesses and dealings with Russia, and they've been impacted by this. I remember talking to my uncle who does a lot of he used to, well, I should say now, he used to do a lot of business with Russian companies.
Not anymore.
And a lot of the monies that apparently, and he was also saying like the Russians don't give him the money that they're supposed to give him. And so like it's basically frozen right now, and he can't get any of this. But I mean, how much longer is this going to get? I think the referendum is probably phase one in President Putin's next kind of plan to kind of try to change the tide right now. Because again, I said this before, but Russia did not expect this war to go this long. It was supposed to be in and out very quickly. They knew that sanctions were going to be implemented on Russia, but they had plans in place for the time being. But then when you had all the U.S. and some of the European countries funding, of course, the military equipment and the weapons and things like that, it gets longer and longer and longer. And now it's phase two, which, of course, taking the referendum into case here. Now Putin kind of has a reason now for why he invaded Ukraine in the first place, because now he's saying that, well, we're just taking back what was taken from us. But again, it's notable that he still refuses to call it a war right now. It's a special operation. As we said on the show, once he does declare war and say that it's a war right now in Ukraine, then there could be a full mobilization of the Russian troops into Ukraine, which will, I think, lead to more casualties, more deaths, and it's going to be really bad. Let's just put it at that. And of course, the world's economy is going to be continuously affected by that as well. Nevertheless, guys, thank you very much for your reports today. Stay safe, and we'll see you guys again.
Thank you.
Thank you. See you.
You can listen to Korea Now with me, SJ Lee, by downloading the Arirang Radio application, or tune in online by visiting www.arirangradio.com. So make sure you tune in Mondays through Fridays, 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. Korea time.